Undead Sinphony.
The night returns, the chalice calls once more. I am the undead preacher, drawing from the sanguis nocturnus, the second blood, the blood of longing. Desire deepens, shadows entwine, and Carmilla moves closer to your pulse. Listen closely to the second part of Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. Chapter 4. Her habits are Saunter. I told you that I was charmed with her in most particulars. There were some that did not please me so well. She was above the middle height of women. I shall begin by describing her. She was slender and wonderfully graceful, except that her movements were languid, very languid. Indeed, there was nothing in her appearance to indicate an invalid. Her complexion was rich and brilliant, her features were small and beautifully formed, her eyes large, dark, and lustrous. Her hair was quite wonderful. I never saw hair so magnificently thick and long when it was down about her shoulders. I have often placed my hands under it and laughed with wonder at its weight. It was exquisitely fine and soft, and in colour a rich, very dark brown, with something of gold. I loved to let it down, tumbling with its own weight, as in her room she lay back in her chair, talking in her sweet, low voice. I used to fold and braid it, and spread it out and play with it. Heavens, if I had but known all! I said there were particulars which did not please me. I have told you that her confidence won me the first night I saw her, but I found that she exercised with respect to herself, her mother, her history, everything in fact connected with her life, plans and people, an ever-wakeful reserve. I dare say I was unreasonable. Perhaps I was wrong. I dare say I ought to have respected the solemn injunction laid upon my father by the stately lady in black velvet, but curiosity is a restless and unscrupulous passion, and no one girl can endure with patience that hers should be baffled by another. What harm could it do anyone to tell me what I so ardently desired to know? Had she no trust in my good sense of honour? Why would she not believe me when I assured her so solemnly that I would not divulge one syllable of what she told me to any mortal breathing? There was a coldness, it seemed to me, beyond her years in her smiling, melancholy, persistent refusal to afford me the least ray of light. I cannot say we quarrelled upon this point, for she would not quarrel upon any. It was of course very unfair of me to press her, very ill-bred, but I really could not help it, and I might just as well have let it alone. What she did tell me amounted, in my unconscionable estimation, to nothing. It was all summed up in 3 very vague disclosures. First, her name was Carmilla. Second, her family was very ancient and noble. Third, her home lay in the direction of the west. She would not tell me the name of her family, nor their armorial bearings, nor the name of their estate, nor even that of the country they lived in. You are not to suppose that I worried her incessantly on these subjects. I watched opportunity, and rather insinuated than urged my inquiries. Once or twice, indeed, I did attack her more directly, but no matter what my tactics, utter failure was invariably the result. Reproaches and caresses were all lost upon her, but I must add this, that her evasion was conducted with so pretty a melancholy and deprecation, with so many and even passionate declarations of her liking for me, and trust in my honour, and with so many promises that I should at last know all, that I could not find it in my heart long to be offended with her. She used to place her pretty arms about my neck, draw me to her, and laying her cheek to mine, murmur with her lips near my ear, "Dearest, your little heart is wounded." Think me not cruel, because I obey the irresistible law of my strength and weakness. If your dear heart is wounded, my wild heart bleeds with yours. In the rapture of my enormous humiliation, I live in your warm life, and you shall die, sweetly die, into mine. I cannot help it. As I draw near to you, you, in your turn, will draw near to others and learn the rapture of that cruelty which yet is love. So, for a while, seek to know no more of me and mine, but trust me with all your loving spirit. And when she had spoken such a rhapsody, she would press me more closely in her trembling embrace, and her lips, in soft kisses, gently glow upon my cheek. Her agitations and her language were unintelligible to me. From these foolish embraces, which were not of very frequent occurrence, I must allow, I used to wish to extricate myself, but my energies seemed to fail me. Her murmured words sounded like a lullaby in my ear, and soothed my resistance into a trance from which I only seemed to recover myself when she withdrew her arms. In these mysterious moods, I did not like her. I experienced a strange, tumultuous excitement that was pleasurable, ever and anon mingled with a vague sense of fear and disgust. I had no distinct thoughts about her while such scenes lasted, but I was conscious of a love growing into adoration and also of abhorrence. This I know is paradox, but I can make no other attempt to explain the feeling. I now write, after an interval of more than 10 years, with a trembling hand, with a confused and horrible recollection of certain occurrences and situations in the ordeal through which I was unconsciously passing, though with a vivid and very sharp remembrance of the main current of my story. But I suspect in all lives there are certain emotional scenes, those in which our passions have been most wildly and terribly roused, that are of all others the most vaguely and dimly remembered. Sometimes, after an hour of apathy, my strange and beautiful companion would take my hand and hold it with a fond pressure, renewed again and again, blushing softly, gazing in my face with languid and burning eyes, and breathing so fast that her dress rose and fell with the tumultuous respiration. It was like the ardour of a lover. It embarrassed me. It was hateful and yet overpowering, and with gloating eyes she drew me to her, and her hot lips travelled along my cheek and kisses, and she would whisper, almost in sobs, "You are mine. You shall be mine. You and I are one forever." Then she had thrown herself back in her chair, with her small hands over her eyes, leaving me trembling. "Are we related?" I used to ask. "What can you mean by all this? I remind you perhaps of someone whom you love, but you must not. I hate it. I don't know you. I don't know myself when you look so and talk so." She used to sigh at my vehemence, then turn away and drop my hand. Respecting these very extraordinary manifestations, I strove in vain to form any satisfactory theory. I could not refer them to affectation or trick. It was unmistakably the momentary breaking out of suppressed instinct and emotion. Was she, notwithstanding her mother's volunteered denial, subject to brief visitations of insanity? Or was there here a disguise and a romance? I had read in old storybooks of such things. What if a boyish lover had found his way into the house and sought to prosecute his suit in masquerade, with the assistance of a clever old adventuress? But there were many things against this hypothesis, highly interesting as it was to my vanity. I could boast of no little attentions such as masculine gallantry delights to offer. Between these passionate moments there were long intervals of commonplace, of gaiety, of brooding melancholy, during which, except that I detected her eyes so full of melancholy fire following me, at times I might have been as nothing to her. Except in these brief periods of mysterious excitement, her ways were girlish, and there was always a languor about her quite incompatible with a masculine system in a state of health. In some respects, her habits were odd, perhaps not so singular in the opinion of a town lady like you, as they appeared to us rustic people. She used to come down very late, generally not till 1 o'clock. She would then take a cup of chocolate, but eat nothing, and then went out for a walk, which is a mere saunter, and she seemed almost immediately exhausted and either returned to the schloss or sat on one of the benches that were placed here and there among the trees. This was a bodily languor in which her mind did not sympathize. She was always an animated talker and very intelligent. She sometimes alluded for a moment to her own home, or mentioned an adventure or situation or an early recollection which indicated a people of strange manners and described customs of which we knew nothing. I gathered from these chance hints that her native country was much more remote than I had at first fancied. As we sat thus one afternoon under the trees, a funeral passed us by. It was that of a pretty young girl whom I had often seen, the daughter of one of the rangers of the forest. The poor man was walking behind the coffin of his darling. She was his only child, and he looked quite heartbroken. Peasants walking two and two came behind. They were singing a funeral hymn. I rose to mark my respect as they passed and joined in the hymn they were very sweetly singing. My companion shook me a little roughly, and I turned surprised. She said brusquely, "Don't you perceive how discordant that is?" "I think it very sweet, on the contrary," I answered, vexed at the interruption and very uncomfortable, lest the people who composed the little procession should observe and resent what was passing. I resumed, therefore, instantly, and was again interrupted. "You pierce my ears," said Carmilla, almost angrily, and stopping her ears with her tiny fingers. "Besides, how can you tell that your religion and mine are the same? Your forms wound me, and I hate funerals. What a fuss. Why, you must die. Everyone must die, and all are happier when they do. Come home. My father has gone on with the clergyman to the churchyard. I thought you knew she was to be buried today." "She? I don't trouble my head about peasants. I don't know who she is," answered Carmilla with a flash from her fine eyes. "She is the poor girl who fancied she saw a ghost a fortnight ago, and has been dying ever since till yesterday, when she expired. Tell me nothing about ghosts. I shan't sleep tonight if you do. I hope there is no plague or fever coming. All this looks very like it," I continued. "The swineherd's young wife died only a week ago, and she thought something seized her by the throat as she lay in her bed and nearly strangled her. Papa says such horrible fancies do accompany some forms of fever. She was quite well the day before. She sank afterwards and died before a week. Well, her funeral is over, I hope, and her hymn sung. And our ears shan't be tortured with that discord and jargon. It has made me nervous. Sit down here beside me. Sit close. Hold my hand. Press it hard, hard, harder." We had moved a little back and had come to another seat. She sat down. Her face underwent a change that alarmed and even terrified me for a moment. It darkened and became horribly livid. Her teeth and hands were clenched, and she frowned and compressed her lips, while she stared down upon the ground at her feet, and trembled all over with a continued shudder as irrepressible as ague. All her energy seemed strained to suppress a fit, with which she was then breathlessly tugging, and at length a low convulsive cry of suffering broke from her, and gradually the hysteria subsided. "There, that comes of strangling people with hymns," she said at last. Hold me still. It is passing away." And so gradually it did, and perhaps to dissipate the sombre impression which the spectacle had left upon me, she became unusually animated and chatty, and so we got home. This was the first time I had seen her exhibit any definable symptoms of that delicacy of health which her mother had spoken of. It was the first time also I had seen her exhibit anything like temper. Both passed away like a summer cloud, and never but once afterwards did I witness on her part a momentary sign of anger. I will tell you how it happened. She and I were looking out of one of the long drawing-room windows, when there entered the courtyard over the drawbridge a figure of a wanderer whom I knew very well. He used to visit the Schloss generally twice a year. It was the figure of a hunchback with the sharp, lean features that generally accompany deformity. He wore a pointed black beard and he was smiling from ear to ear, showing his white fangs. He was dressed in buff, black and scarlet and crossed with more straps and belts than I could count, from which hung all manner of things. Behind he carried a magic lantern and 2 boxes which I well knew, in one of which was a salamander and in the other a mandrake. These monsters used to make my father laugh. They were compounded of parts of monkeys, parrots, squirrels, fish and hedgehogs, dried and stitched together with great neatness and startling effect. He had a fiddle, a box of conjuring apparatus, a pair of foils and masks attached to his belt, several other mysterious cases dangling about him, and a black staff with copper ferrules in his hand. His companion was a rough spare dog that followed at his heels but stopped short suspiciously at the drawbridge and in a little while began to howl dismally. In the meantime, the mountebank, standing in the midst of the courtyard, raised his grotesque hat and made us a very ceremonious bow, paying his compliments very volubly in execrable French and German not much better. Then, disengaging his fiddle, he began to scrape a lively air, to which he sang with a merry discord, dancing with ludicrous airs and activity that made me laugh in spite of the dog's howling. Then he advanced to the window with many smiles and salutations, and his hat in his left hand, his fiddle under his arm, and with a fluency that never took breath, he gabbled a long advertisement of all his accomplishments and the resources of the various arts which he placed out at our service, and the curiosities and entertainments which it was in his power at our bidding to display.
"Will your ladyships be pleased to buy an amulet against the Upire, which is going like the wolf I hear through these woods?" he said, dropping his hat on the pavement. "They are dying of it right and left, and here's a charm that never fails. Only pinned to the pillow and you may laugh in his face." These charms consisted of oblong slips of vellum with cabalistic ciphers and diagrams upon them. Carmilla instantly purchased one, and so did I. He was looking up, and we were smiling down upon him amused. At least I can answer for myself. His piercing black eye, as he looked up in our faces, seemed to detect something that fixed for a moment his curiosity. In an instant he unrolled a leather case full of all manner of odd little steel instruments. "See here, my lady," he said, displaying it and addressing me. "I profess, among other things less useful, the art of dentistry." "Plague take the dog," he interpolated. "Silence, beast! He howls so that your ladyships can scarcely hear a word. Your noble friend, the young lady at your right, has the sharpest tooth. Long, thin, pointed like an awl, like a needle. With my sharp and long sight, as I look up, I have seen it distinctly. Now, if it happens to hurt the young lady, and I think it must, here am I. Here are my file, my punch, my nippers. I will make it round and blunt if her ladyship pleases. No longer the tooth of a fish, but of a beautiful young lady as she is. Hey! Is the young lady displeased? Have I been too bold? Have I offended her?" The young lady indeed looked very angry as she drew back from the window. "How dares that mountebank insult us so? Where is your father? I shall demand redress from him. My father would have had the wretch tied up to the pump and flogged with a cart whip and burnt to the bones with a cattle brand." She retired from the window a step or two and sat down, and had hardly lost sight of the offender when her wrath subsided as suddenly as it had risen, and she gradually recovered her usual tone and seemed to forget the little hunchback and his follies. My father was out of spirits that evening. On coming in, he told us that there had been another case very similar to the 2 fatal ones which had lately occurred. The sister of a young peasant on his estate, only a mile away, was very ill, had been, as she described it, attacked very nearly in the same way, and was now slowly but steadily sinking. All this, said my father, is strictly referable to natural causes. These poor people infect one another with their superstitions, and so repeat in imagination the images of terror that have infested their neighbours.
But that very circumstance frightens one horribly, said Carmilla.
How so? Inquired my father.
I am so afraid of fancying I see such things. I think it would be as bad as reality.
We are in God's hands. Nothing can happen without his permission, and all will end well for those who love him. He is our faithful creator. He has made us all, and will take care of us.
Creator, nature, said the young lady in answer to my gentle father. And this disease that invades the country is natural, nature. All things proceed from nature, don't they? All things in the heaven, in the earth, and under the earth act and live as nature ordains. I think so.
The doctor said he would come here today, said my father after a silence. I want to know what he thinks about it, and what he thinks we had better do.
Doctors never did me any good, said Carmilla.
Then you have been ill? I asked.
More ill than ever you were, she answered.
Long ago?
Yes, a long time. I suffered from this very illness, but I forget all but my pain and weakness, and they were not so bad as I suffered in other diseases. You were very young then. I dare say let us talk no more of it. You would not wound a friend. She looked languidly in my eyes and passed her arm around my waist lovingly and led me out of the room. My father was busy over some papers near the window. Why does your papa like to frighten us? Said the pretty girl with a sigh and a little shudder. He doesn't, dear Carmilla. It is the very furthest thing from his mind. Are you afraid, dearest? I should be very much, if I fancied there was any real danger of my being attacked as those poor people were. You are afraid to die? Yes, everyone is. But to die as lovers may. To die together, so that they may live together. Girls are caterpillars while they live in the world, to be finally butterflies when the summer comes. But in the meantime, there are grubs and larvae, don't you see? Each with their peculiar propensities, necessities, and structure. So says Monsieur Buffon in his big book in the next room. Later in the day, the doctor came and was closeted with Papa for some time. He was a skillful man of 60 and upwards. He wore powder and shaved his pale face as smooth as a pumpkin. He and Papa emerged from the room together, and I heard Papa laugh and say as they came out, "Well, I do wonder at a wise man like you. What do you say to hippogriffs and dragons?" The doctor was smiling and made answer, shaking his head. "Nevertheless, life and death are mysterious states, and we know little of the resources of either." And so they walked on, and I heard no more. I did not then know what the doctor had been broaching, but I think I guess it now. Chapter 5. A Wonderful Likeness. This evening there arrived from Graz the grave, dark-faced son of the picture cleaner, with a horse and cart laden with 2 large packing cases, having many pictures in each. It was a journey of 10 leagues, and whenever a messenger arrived at the Schloss from our little capital of Graz, we used to crowd about him in the hall to hear the news. This arrival created in our secluded quarters quite a sensation. The cases remained in the hall, and the messenger was taken charge of by the servants till he had eaten his supper. Then, with assistants and armed with hammer, ripping chisel, and turn-screw, he met us in the hall, where we had assembled to witness the unpacking of the cases. Carmilla sat looking listlessly on, while one after the other the old pictures, nearly all portraits, which had undergone the process of renovation, were brought to light. My mother was of an old Hungarian family, and most of these pictures, which were about to be restored to their places, had come to us through her. My father had a list in his hand, from which he read, as the artist rummaged out the corresponding numbers. I don't know that the pictures were very good, but they were undoubtedly very old, and some of them very curious also. They had for the most part the merit of being now seen by me, I may say, for the first time, for the smoke and dust of time had all but obliterated them.
"There is a picture that I have not seen yet," said my father. "In one corner at the top of it is the name, as well as I could read Marcia Karnstein, and the date 1698, and I am curious to see how it has turned out."
I remembered it. It was a small picture about 1.5 feet high, and nearly square without a frame, but it was so blackened by age that I could not make it out. The artist now produced it with evident pride. It was quite beautiful. It was startling. It seemed to live. It was the effigy of Carmilla. Carmilla, dear, here is an absolute miracle. Here you are, living, smiling, ready to speak in this picture. Isn't it beautiful, Papa? And see, even the little mole on her throat. My father laughed and said, "Certainly, it is a wonderful likeness," but he looked away and, to my surprise, seemed but little struck by it and went on talking to the picture cleaner, who was also something of an artist, and discoursed with intelligence about the portraits or other works which his art had just brought into light and colour, while I was more and more lost in wonder the more I looked at the picture. "Will you let me hang this picture in my room, Papa?" I asked. "Certainly, dear," said he, smiling. "I'm very glad you think it so like. It must be prettier even than I thought it, if it is." The young lady did not acknowledge this pretty speech, did not seem to hear it. She was leaning back in her seat, her fine eyes under their long lashes gazing on me in contemplation, and she smiled in a kind of rapture. "And now you can read quite plainly the name that is written in the corner. It is not Marcia. It looks as if it was done in gold. The name is Mercala, Countess Karnstein, and this is a little coronet over and underneath AD 1698. I am descended from the Karnsteins. That is, Mamma was." "Ah," said the lady languidly. "So am I think. A very long descent, very ancient. Are there any Karnsteins living now?" "None who bear the name, I believe. The family were ruined, I believe, in some civil wars long ago, but the ruins of the castle are only about 3 miles away." "How interesting," she said languidly. "But see what beautiful moonlight." She glanced through the hall door, which stood a little open. "Suppose you take a little ramble round the court and look down at the road and river." "It is so like the night you came to us," I said. She sighed, smiling. She rose, and each with her arm about the other's waist, we walked out upon the pavement. In silence, slowly we walked down the drawbridge where the beautiful landscape opened before us. "And so you were thinking of the night I came here," she almost whispered. "Are you glad I came?" "Delighted, dear Carmilla," I answered. "And you asked for the picture you think like me to hang in your room," she murmured with a sigh as she drew her arm closer about my waist and let her pretty head sink upon my shoulder. "How romantic you are, Carmilla," I said. "Whenever you tell me your story, it will be made up chiefly of some one great romance." She kissed me silently. "I am sure, Carmilla, you have been in love, that there is at this moment an affair of the heart going on." "I have been in love with no one and never shall," she whispered, "unless it should be with you." How beautiful she looked in the moonlight. Shy and strange was the look with which she quickly hid her face in my neck and hair, with tumultuous sighs that seemed almost to sob, and pressed in mine a hand that trembled. Her soft cheek was glowing against mine. "Darling, darling," she murmured, "I live in you, and you would die for me. I love you so." I started from her. She was gazing on me with eyes from which all fire, all meaning had flown, and a face colourless and apathetic. "Is there a chill in the air, dear?" she said drowsily. I almost shiver. "Have I been dreaming? Let us come in. Come in." "You look ill, Carmilla. A little faint. You certainly must take some wine," I said. "Yes, I will. I'm better now. I shall be quite well in a few minutes." "Yes, do give me a little wine," answered Carmilla as we approached the door. "Let us look again for a moment. It is the last time perhaps I shall see the moonlight with you." How do you feel now, dear Carmilla? Are you really better? I asked. I was beginning to take alarm, lest she should have been stricken with the strange epidemic that they said had invaded the country about us. Papa would be grieved beyond measure, I added, if he thought you were ever so little ill, without immediately letting us know. We have a very skillful doctor near us, the physician who was with Papa today. I'm sure he is. I know how kind you all are, but dear child, I am quite well again. There is nothing ever wrong with me but a little weakness. People say I am languid. I am incapable of exertion. I can scarcely walk as far as a child of 3 years old, and every now and then the little strength I have falters, and I become as you have just seen me. But after all, I am very easily set up again. In a moment I am perfectly myself. See how I have recovered. So indeed she had, and she and I talked a great deal, and very animated she was, and the remainder of that evening passed without any recurrence of what I called her infatuations. I mean her crazy talk and looks, which embarrassed and even frightened me. But there occurred that night an event which gave my thoughts quite a new turn and seemed to startle even Carmilla's languid nature into momentary energy. Chapter 6. A Very Strange Agony. When we got into the drawing room and had sat down to our coffee and chocolate, although Carmilla did not take any, she seemed quite herself again, and Madame and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine joined us and made a little card party, in the course of which Papa came in for what he called his dish of tea. When the game was over, he sat down beside Carmilla on the sofa and asked her a little anxiously whether she had heard from her mother since her arrival. She answered no. He then asked her whether she knew where a letter would reach her at present. I cannot tell, she answered ambiguously, but I have been thinking of leaving you. You have been already too hospitable and too kind to me. I have given you an infinity of trouble, and I should wish to take a carriage tomorrow and post in pursuit of her. I know where I shall ultimately find her, although I dare not yet tell you.
But you must not dream of any such thing, exclaimed my father to my great relief. We can't afford to lose you so, and I won't consent to your leaving us except under the care of your mother, who was so good as to consent to your remaining with us till she should herself return. I should be quite happy if I knew that you heard from her, but this evening the accounts of the progress of the mysterious disease that has invaded our neighbourhood grow even more alarming. And my beautiful guest, I do feel the responsibility unaided by advice from your mother very much. But I shall do my best, and one thing is certain, that you must not think of leaving us without her distinct direction to that effect. We should suffer too much in parting from you to consent to it easily.
Thank you, sir, 1,000 times for your hospitality, she answered, smiling bashfully. You have all been too kind to me. I have seldom been so happy in all my life before as in your beautiful chateau, under your care and in the society of your dear daughter. So he gallantly, in his old-fashioned way, kissed her hand, smiling and pleased at her little speech. I accompanied Carmilla as usual to her room and sat and chatted with her while she was preparing for bed. Do you think, I said at length, that you will ever confide fully in me? She turned round, smiling, but made no answer, only continued to smile on me. You won't answer that, I said. You can't answer pleasantly. I ought not to have asked you. You were quite right to ask me that or anything. You do not know how dear you are to me, or you could not think any confidence too great to look for. But I am under vows, no, none half so awfully, and I dare not tell my story yet, even to you. The time is very near when you shall know everything. You will think me cruel, very selfish, but love is always selfish. The more ardent, the more selfish. How jealous I am, you cannot know. You must come with me, loving me to death, or else hate me, and still come with me, and hating me through death and after. There is no such word as indifference in my apathetic nature. Now, Carmilla, you are going to talk your wild nonsense again, I said hastily. Not I. Silly little fool as I am, and full of whims and fancies, for your sake I'll talk like a sage. Were you ever at a ball? No. How you do run on. What is it like? How charming it must be. I almost forget it is years ago. I laughed. You are not so old. Your first ball can hardly be forgotten yet. I remember everything about it, with an effort. I see it all, as divers see what is going on above them, through a medium, dense, rippling, but transparent. There occurred that night what has confused the picture and made its colours faint. I was all but assassinated in my bed, wounded here. She touched her breast, and never was the same since. Were you near dying? Yes, very. A cruel love, strange love, that would have taken my life. Love will have its sacrifices. No sacrifice without blood. Let us go to sleep now. I feel so lazy. How can I get up just now and lock my door? She was lying with her tiny hands buried in her rich wavy hair under her cheek, her little head upon the pillow, and her glittering eyes followed me wherever I moved, with a kind of shy smile that I could not decipher. I bid her good night and crept from the room with an uncomfortable sensation. I often wondered whether our pretty guest ever said her prayers. I certainly had never seen her upon her knees. In the morning she never came down until long after our family prayers were over, and at night she never left the drawing room to attend our brief evening prayers in the hall. If it had not been that it had casually come out in one of our careless talks that she had been baptized, I should have doubted her being a Christian. Religion was a subject on which I had never heard her speak a word. If I had known the world better, this particular neglect or antipathy would not have so much surprised me. The precautions of nervous people are infectious, and persons of a like temperament are pretty sure after a time to imitate them. I had adopted Carmilla's habit of locking her bedroom door, having taken into my head all her whimsical alarms about midnight invaders and prowling assassins. I had also adopted her precaution of making a brief search through her room to satisfy herself that no lurking assassin or robber was ensconced. These wise measures taken, I got into my bed and fell asleep. A light was burning in my room. This was an old habit of very early date, and which nothing could have tempted me to dispense with. Thus fortified, I might take my rest in peace, but dreams come through stone walls, light up dark rooms, or darken light ones, and their persons make their exits and their entrances as they please, and laugh at locksmiths. I had a dream that night that was the beginning of a very strange agony. I cannot call it a nightmare, for I was quite conscious of being asleep. But I was equally conscious of being in my room and lying in bed, precisely as I actually was. I saw, or fancied I saw, the room and its furniture just as I had seen it last, except that it was very dark, and I saw something moving round the foot of the bed, which at first I could not accurately distinguish, but I soon saw that it was a sooty black animal that resembled a monstrous cat. It appeared to me 4 or 5 feet long, for it measured fully the length of the hearth rug as it passed over it, and it continued toing and froing with the lithe, sinister restlessness of a beast in a cage. I could not cry out, although, as you may suppose, I was terrified. Its pace was growing faster, and the room rapidly darker and darker, and at length so dark that I could no longer see anything of it but its eyes. I felt it spring lightly on the bed. The 2 broad eyes approached my face, and suddenly I felt a stinging pain as if 2 large needles darted an inch or 2 apart deep into my breast. I waked with a scream. The room was lighted by the candle that burned there all through the night, and I saw a female figure standing at the foot of the bed, a little at the right side. It was in a dark loose dress, and its hair was down and covered its shoulders. A block of stone could not have been more still. There was not the slightest stir of respiration. As I stared at it, the figure appeared to have changed its place and was now nearer the door. Then close to it, the door opened and it passed out. I was now relieved and able to breathe and move. My first thought was that Carmilla had been playing me a trick and that I had forgotten to secure my door. I hastened to it and found it locked as usual on the inside. I was afraid to open it. I was horrified. I sprang into my bed and covered my head up in the bedclothes and lay there more dead than alive till morning. Chapter 7. Descending. It would be vain my attempting to tell you the horror with which even now I recall the occurrence of that night. It was no such transitory terror as a dream leaves behind it. It seemed to deepen by time and communicated itself to the room and the very furniture that had encompassed the apparition. I could not bear next day to be alone for a moment. I should have told Papa, but for two opposite reasons. At one time I thought he would laugh at my story, and I could not bear its being treated as a jest, and at another I thought he might fancy that I had been attacked by the mysterious complaint which had invaded our neighbourhood. I had myself no misgiving of the kind, and as he had been rather an invalid for some time, I was afraid of alarming him. I was comfortable enough with my good-natured companions, Madame Perrodon and the vivacious Mademoiselle Lafontaine. They both perceived that I was out of spirits and nervous, and at length I told them what lay so heavy at my heart. Mademoiselle laughed, but I fancied that Madame Perrodon looked anxious. "By the by," said Mademoiselle, laughing, "the long lime-tree walk behind Carmilla's bedroom window is haunted." "Nonsense!" exclaimed Madame, who probably thought the theme rather inopportune. "And who tells that story, my dear?" "Martin says that he came up twice when the old yard gate was being repaired before sunrise, and twice saw the same female figure walking down the lime-tree avenue. So he well might, as long as there are cows to milk in the river fields," said Madame. "I dare say, but Martin chooses to be frightened, and never did I see fool more frightened." "You must not say a word about it to Carmilla, because she can see down that walk from her room window," I interposed, "and she is, if possible, a greater coward than I." Carmilla came down rather later than usual that day. "I was so frightened last night," she said, so soon as we're together, "and I am sure I should have seen something dreadful if it had not been for that charm I bought from the poor little hunchback whom I called such hard names. I had a dream of something black coming round my bed, and I awoke in a perfect horror, and I really thought for some seconds I saw a dark figure near the chimney-piece, but I felt under my pillow for my charm, and the moment my fingers touched it, the figure disappeared, and I felt quite certain, only that I had it by me, that something frightful would have made its appearance and perhaps throttled me, as it did those poor people we heard of. "Well, listen to me," I began and recounted my adventure, at the recital of which she appeared horrified. "And had you the charm near you?" she asked earnestly. "No, I had dropped it into a china vase in the drawing-room, but I shall certainly take it with me tonight, as you have so much faith in it." At this distance of time, I cannot tell you or even understand how I overcame my horror so effectually as to lie alone in my room that night. I remember distinctly that I pinned the charm to my pillow. I fell asleep almost immediately and slept even more soundly than usual all night. Next night I passed as well. My sleep was delightfully deep and dreamless, but I wakened with a sense of lassitude and melancholy which, however, did not exceed a degree that was almost luxurious. "Well, I told you so," said Carmilla when I described my quiet sleep. "I had such delightful sleep myself last night. I pinned the charm to the breast of my nightdress. It was too far away the night before. I am quite sure it was all fancy except the dreams. I used to think that evil spirits made dreams, but our doctor told me it is no such thing. Only a fever passing by or some other malady, as they often do, he said, knocks at the door and not being able to get in, passes on without alarm." "And what do you think the charm is?" said I. It has been fumigated or immersed in some drug, and is an antidote against the malaria, she answered. Then it acts only on the body? Certainly. You don't suppose that evil spirits are frightened by bits of ribbon or the perfumes of a druggist's shop? No, these complaints wandering in the air begin by trying the nerves, and so infect the brain, but before they can seize upon you, the antidote repels them. That, I am sure, is what the charm has done for us. It is nothing magical, it is simply natural. I should have been happier if I could have quite agreed with Carmilla, but I did my best and the impression was a little losing its force. For some nights I slept profoundly, but still every morning I felt the same lassitude, and a languor weighed upon me all day. I felt myself a changed girl. A strange melancholy was stealing over me, a melancholy that I would not have interrupted. Dim thoughts of death began to open, and an idea that I was slowly sinking took gentle and somehow not unwelcome possession of me. If it was sad, the tone of mind which this induced was also sweet. Whatever it might be, my soul acquiesced in it. I would not admit that I was ill. I would not consent to tell my papa or to have the doctor sent for. Carmilla became more devoted to me than ever, and her strange paroxysms of languid adoration more frequent. She used to gloat on me with increasing ardour the more my strength and spirits waned. This always shocked me like a momentary glare of insanity. Without knowing it, I was now in a pretty advanced stage of the strangest illness under which mortal ever suffered. There was an unaccountable fascination in its earlier symptoms that more than reconciled me to the incapacitating effect of that stage of the malady. This fascination increased for a time until it reached a certain point when gradually a sense of the horrible mingled itself with it, deepening as you shall hear, until it discoloured and perverted the whole state of my life. The first change I experienced was rather agreeable. It was very near the turning point from which began the descent of Avernus. Certain vague and strange sensations visited me in my sleep. The prevailing one was of that pleasant, peculiar cold thrill which we feel in bathing when we move against the current of a river. This was soon accompanied by dreams that seemed interminable, and was so vague that I could never recollect their scenery and persons or any one connected portion of their action, but they left an awful impression and a sense of exhaustion, as if I had passed through a long period of great mental exertion and danger. After all these dreams, there remained on waking a remembrance of having been in a place very nearly dark, and of having spoken to people whom I could not see, and especially of one clear voice, of a female's, very deep, that spoke as if at a distance, slowly, and producing always the same sensation of indescribable solemnity and fear. Sometimes there came a sensation as if a hand was drawn softly along my cheek and neck. Sometimes it was as if warm lips kissed me, and longer and more lovingly as they reached my throat. But there the caress fixed itself. My heart beat faster, my breathing rose and fell rapidly and full drawn. A sobbing that rose into a sense of strangulation supervened, and turned into a dreadful convulsion in which my senses left me and I became unconscious. It was now 3 weeks since the commencement of this unaccountable state. My sufferings had during the last week told upon my appearance. I had grown pale, my eyes were dilated and darkened underneath, and the languor which I had long felt began to display itself in my countenance. My father asked me often whether I was ill, but with an obstinacy which now seems to be unaccountable, I persisted in assuring him that I was quite well. In a sense, this was true. I had no pain. I could complain of no bodily derangement. My complaints seemed to be one of the imagination or the nerves, and horrible as my sufferings were, I kept them with a morbid reserve very nearly to myself. It could not be that terrible complaint which the peasants called the upire, for I had now been suffering for 3 weeks, and they were seldom ill for much more than 3 days, when death put an end to their miseries. Carmilla complained of dreams and feverish sensations, but by no means of so alarming a kind as mine. I say that mine were extremely alarming. Had I been capable of comprehending my condition, I would have invoked aid and advice on my knees. The narcotic of an unsuspected influence was acting upon me, and my perceptions were benumbed. I am going to tell you now of a dream that led immediately to an odd discovery. One night, instead of the voice I was accustomed to hear in the dark, I heard one sweet and tender and at the same time terrible, which said, "Your mother warns you to beware of the assassin." At the same time, a light unexpectedly sprang up and I saw Carmilla standing near the foot of my bed in her white nightdress, bathed from her chin to her feet in one great stain of blood. I wakened with a shriek, possessed with the one idea that Carmilla was being murdered. I remember springing from my bed, and my next recollection is that of standing on the lobby crying for help. Madame and Mademoiselle came scurrying out of their rooms in alarm. A lamp burned always on the lobby, and seeing me they soon learned the cause of my terror. I insisted on our knocking at Carmilla's door. Our knocking was unanswered. It soon became a pounding and an uproar. We shrieked her name, but all was vain. We all grew frightened, for the door was locked. We hurried back in panic to my room. There we rang the bell long and furiously. If my father's room had been at the side of the house, we would have called him up at once to our aid. But alas, he was quite out of hearing, and to reach him involved an excursion for which none of us had courage. Servants, however, soon came running up the stairs. I had got on my dressing gown and slippers meanwhile, and my companions were already similarly furnished. Recognizing the voices of the servants on the lobby, we sallied out together, and having renewed as fruitlessly our summons at Carmilla's door, I ordered the men to force the lock. They did so, and we stood, holding our lights aloft in the doorway, and so stared into the room. We called her by name, but there was still no reply. We looked round the room. Everything was undisturbed. It was exactly in the state in which I had left it on bidding her good night, but Carmilla was gone. Chapter 8. Search. At sight of the room, perfectly undisturbed except for our violent entrance, we began to cool a little, and soon recovered our senses sufficiently to dismiss the men. It had struck Mademoiselle that possibly Carmilla had been wakened by the uproar at her door, and in her first panic had jumped from her bed and hid herself in a press or behind a curtain, from which she could not, of course, emerge until the majordomo and his myrmidons had withdrawn. We now recommenced our search and began to call her name again. It was all to no purpose. Our perplexity and agitation increased. We examined the windows, but they were secured. I implored of Carmilla, if she had concealed herself, to play this cruel trick no longer, to come out and to end our anxieties. It was all useless. I was by this time convinced that she was not in the room, nor in the dressing room, the door of which was still locked on this side. She could not have passed it. I was utterly puzzled. Had Carmilla discovered one of those secret passages which the old housekeeper said were known to exist in the Schloss, although the tradition of their exact situation had been lost? A little time would no doubt explain all, utterly perplexed as for the present we were. It was past 4 o'clock, and I preferred passing the remaining hours of darkness in Madame's room. Daylight brought no solution of the difficulty. The whole household, with my father at its head, was in a state of agitation next morning. Every part of the chateau was searched. The grounds were explored. No trace of the missing lady could be discovered. The stream was about to be dragged. My father was in distraction. What a tale to have to tell the poor girl's mother on her return. I too was almost beside myself, though my grief was quite of a different kind. The morning was passed in alarm and excitement. It was now 1 o'clock and still no tidings. I ran up to Carmilla's room and found her standing at her dressing table. I was astounded. I could not believe my eyes. She beckoned me to her with her pretty finger in silence. Her face expressed extreme fear. I ran to her in an ecstasy of joy. I kissed and embraced her again and again. I ran to the bell and rang it vehemently to bring others to the spot who might at once relieve my father's anxiety. "Dear Carmilla, what has become of you all this time? We have been in agonies of anxiety about you," I exclaimed. "Where have you been? How did you come back?" "Last night has been a night of wonders," she said. "For mercy's sake, explain all you can." "It was past 2 last night," she said, "when I went to sleep as usual in my bed with my doors locked, that of the dressing room and that opening upon the gallery. My sleep was uninterrupted and, so far as I know, dreamless. But I woke just now on the sofa in the dressing room there, and I found the door between the rooms open and the other door forced. How could all this have happened without my being wakened? It must have been accompanied with a great deal of noise, and I am particularly easily wakened. And how could I have been carried out of my bed without my sleep having been interrupted? I, whom the slightest stir startles." By this time, Mademoiselle, my father, and a number of the servants were in the room. Carmilla was of course overwhelmed with inquiries, congratulations, and welcomes. She had but one story to tell, and seemed the least able of all the party to suggest any way of accounting for what had happened. My father took a turn up and down the room, thinking. I saw Carmilla's eye follow him for a moment with a sly, dark glance. When my father had sent the servants away, Mademoiselle having gone in search of a little bottle of valerian and sal volatile, and there being no one now in the room with Carmilla except my father, Madame, and myself, he came to her thoughtfully, took her hand very kindly, led her to the sofa, and sat down beside her. "Will you forgive me, my dear, if I risk a conjecture and ask a question?" "Who can have a better right?" she said. "Ask what you please, and I will tell you everything. But my story is simply one of bewilderment and darkness. I know absolutely nothing. Put any question you please, but you know, of course, the limitations Mamma has placed me under." "Perfectly, my dear child. I need not approach the topics on which she desires our silence. Now, the marvel of last night consists in your having been removed from your bed and your room without being wakened, and this removal having occurred apparently while the windows were still secured and the 2 doors locked upon the inside. I will tell you my theory and ask you a question." Carmilla was leaning on her hand dejectedly. Madame and I were listening breathlessly. "Now, my question is this. Have you ever been suspected of walking in your sleep?" "Never since I was very young indeed." "But you did walk in your sleep when you were young?" "Yes, I know I did. I have been told so often by my old nurse." My father smiled and nodded. "Well, what has happened is this. You got up in your sleep, unlocked the door, not leaving the key as usual in the lock, but taking it out and locking it on the outside. You again took the key out and carried it away with you to some one of the 25 rooms on this floor, or perhaps upstairs or downstairs. There are so many rooms and closets, so much heavy furniture and such accumulations of lumber that it would require a week to search this old house thoroughly. Do you see now what I mean?" "I do, but not all," she answered. "And how, Papa, do you account for her finding herself on the sofa in the dressing room, which we had searched so carefully?" "She came there after you had searched it, still in her sleep,
and at last awoke spontaneously, and was as much surprised to find herself where she was as anyone else. I wish all mysteries were as easily and innocently explained as yours, Carmilla, he said, laughing. And so we may congratulate ourselves on the certainty that the most natural explanation of the occurrence is one that involves no drugging, no tampering with locks, no burglars or poisoners or witches, nothing that need alarm Carmilla or anyone else for our safety.
Carmilla was looking charmingly. Nothing could be more beautiful than her tints. Her beauty was, I think, enhanced by that graceful languor that was peculiar to her. I think my father was silently contrasting her looks with mine, for he said, "I wish my poor Laura was looking more like herself," and he sighed. So our alarms were happily ended and Carmilla restored to her friends. Chapter 9. The Doctor. As Carmilla would not hear of an attendant sleeping in her room, my father arranged that a servant should sleep outside her door so that she would not attempt to make another such excursion without being arrested at her own door. That night passed quietly, and the next morning early, the doctor, whom my father had sent for without telling me a word about it, arrived to see me. Madam accompanied me to the library, and there the grave little doctor with white hair and spectacles whom I mentioned before was waiting to receive me. I told him my story, and as I proceeded he grew graver and graver. We were standing, he and I, in the recess of one of the windows facing one another. When my statement was over, he leaned with his shoulders against the wall, and with his eyes fixed on me earnestly, with an interest in which was a dash of horror. After a minute's reflection, he asked Madam if he could see my father. He was sent for accordingly, and as he entered, smiling, he said, "I dare say, Doctor, you are going to tell me that I am an old fool for having brought you here. I hope I am." But his smile faded into shadow as the doctor, with a very grave face, beckoned him to him. He and the doctor talked for some time in the same recess where I had just conferred with the physician. It seemed an earnest and argumentative conversation. The room is very large, and I and Madam stood together, burning with curiosity at the farther end. Not a word could we hear, however, for they spoke in a very low tone, and the deep recess of the window quite concealed the doctor from view, and very nearly my father, whose foot, arm, and shoulder only could we see, and the voices were, I suppose, all the less audible for the sort of closet which the thick wall and window formed. After a time, my father's face looked into the room. It was pale, thoughtful, and I fancied agitated. "Laura, dear, come here for a moment. Madam, we shan't trouble you, the doctor says, at present." Accordingly, I approached, for the first time a little alarmed, for although I felt very weak, I did not feel ill, and strength, one always fancies, is a thing that may be picked up when we please. My father held out his hand to me as I drew near, but he was looking at the doctor, and he said, "It certainly is very odd. I don't understand it quite. Laura, come here, dear. Now attend to Dr. Spielsberg and recollect yourself. You mentioned a sensation like that of 2 needles piercing the skin somewhere about your neck on the night when you experienced your first horrible dream. Is there still any soreness?" "None at all," I answered. "Can you indicate with your finger about the point at which you think this occurred?" "Very little below my throat." "Here," I answered. I wore a morning dress which covered the place I pointed to. "Now you can satisfy yourself," said the doctor. "You won't mind your papa's lowering your dress so very little. It is necessary to detect a symptom of the complaint under which you have been suffering." I acquiesced. It was only an inch or 2 below the edge of my collar. "God bless me, so it is," exclaimed my father, growing pale. "You see it now with your own eyes," said the doctor with a gloomy triumph. "What is it?" I exclaimed, beginning to be frightened. "Nothing, my dear young lady, but a small blue spot, about the size of the tip of your little finger. And now," he continued, turning to Papa, "the question is, what is best to be done?" Is there any danger? I urged in great trepidation. I trust not, my dear, answered the doctor. I don't see why you should not recover. I don't see why you should not begin immediately to get better. That is the point at which the sense of strangulation begins. Yes, I answered, and recollect as well as you can, the same point was a kind of center of that thrill which you described just now, like the current of a cold stream running against you. It may have been, I think it was. Aye, you see, he added, turning to my father. Shall I say a word to Madame? Certainly, said my father. He called Madame to him and said, I find my young friend here far from well. It won't be of any great consequence, I hope, but it will be necessary that some steps be taken, which I will explain by and by. But in the meantime, Madame, you will be so good as not to let Miss Laura be alone for one moment. That is the only direction I need give for the present. It is indispensable. We may rely upon your kindness, madam, I know, added my father. Madam satisfied him eagerly. And you, dear Laura, I know you will observe the doctor's direction. I shall have to ask your opinion upon another patient, whose symptoms slightly resemble those of my daughter that have just been detailed to you. Very much milder in degree, but I believe quite of the same sort. She is a young lady, our guest, but as you say you will be passing this way again this evening, you can't do better than take your supper here, and you can then see her. She does not come down till the afternoon. I thank you, said the doctor. I shall be with you then at about 7 this evening. And then they repeated their directions to me and to Madam, and with this parting charge my father left us and walked out with the doctor, and I saw them pacing together up and down between the road and the moat on the grassy platform in front of the castle, evidently absorbed in earnest conversation. The doctor did not return. I saw him mount his horse there, take his leave, and ride away eastward through the forest. Nearly at the same time I saw the man arrive from Dranfield with the letters and dismount and hand the bag to my father. In the meantime, Madam and I were both busy, lost in conjecture as to the reasons of the singular and earnest direction which the doctor and my father had concurred in imposing. Madam, as she afterwards told me, was afraid the doctor apprehended a sudden seizure, and that without prompt assistance I might either lose my life in a fit or at least be seriously hurt. The interpretation did not strike me, and I fancied, perhaps luckily for my nerves, that the arrangement was prescribed simply to secure a companion who would prevent my taking too much exercise or eating unripe fruit or doing any of the 50 foolish things to which young people are supposed to be prone. About half an hour after, my father came in. He had a letter in his hand and said, this letter had been delayed. It is from General Spielsdorf. He might have been here yesterday. He may not come till tomorrow, or he may be here today. He put the open letter in my hand, but he did not look pleased as he used when a guest, especially one so much loved as the General, was coming. On the contrary, he looked as if he wished him at the bottom of the Red Sea. There was plainly something on his mind which he did not choose to divulge. Papa, darling, will you tell me this? Said I, suddenly laying my hand on his arm and looking, I am sure, imploringly in his face. Perhaps, he answered, smoothing my hair caressingly over my eyes. Does the doctor think me very ill? No, dear. He thinks, if right steps are taken, you will be quite well again, at least on the high road to a complete recovery in a day or two, he answered, a little dryly. I wish our good friend the General had chosen any other time. That is, I wish you had been perfectly well to receive him. But do tell me, Papa, I insisted. What does he think is the matter with me? Nothing. You must not plague me with questions, he answered, with more irritation than I ever remember him to have displayed before, and seeing that I looked wounded, I suppose he kissed me and added, You shall know all about it in a day or two. That is, all that I know. In the meantime, you are not to trouble your head about it. He turned and left the room. but came back before I had done wondering and puzzling over the oddity of all this. It was merely to say that he was going to Karnstein and had ordered the carriage to be ready at 12, and that I and Madam should accompany him. He was going to see the priest who lived near those picturesque grounds upon business, and as Carmilla had never seen them, she should follow when she came down with Mademoiselle, who would bring materials for what you call a picnic, which might be laid for us in the ruined castle. At 12 o'clock accordingly I was ready, and not long after, my father, Madam, and I set out upon our projected drive. Passing the drawbridge, we turned to the right and followed the road over the steep Gothic bridge westward to reach the deserted village and ruined castle of Karnstein. No sylvan drive can be fancied prettier. The ground breaks into gentle hills and hollows, all clothed with beautiful wood, totally destitute of the comparative formality which artificial planting and early culture and pruning impart. The irregularities of the ground often lead the road out of its course and cause it to wind beautifully round the sides of broken hollows and the steeper sides of the hills among varieties of ground almost inexhaustible. Turning one of these points, we suddenly encountered our old friend, the general, riding towards us, attended by a mounted servant. His portmanteaus were following in a hired wagon, such as we term a cart. The general dismounted as we pulled up, and after the usual greetings was easily persuaded to accept the vacant seat in the carriage and send his horse on with his servant to the Schloss. The second chalice is drained. The flame trembles, not yet consumed. One candle left to burn before the darkness comes.